Great. This group quiets down so well. Thank you. Okay, so I'm so happy to introduce our second panel for today. The topic is broadly leading for dynamic learning systems. And I'm delighted that the facilitator for this session is Brent Madden. He is the executive director for the Next Education Workforce Initiative, which is an initiative that he is working very closely with Dean Basile and a great team through Mary Lou Fulton College to create significant changes using a team-based approach in schools and school districts nationally and internationally. So he's so well prepared to facilitate this discussion. As you'll see, we have only one of our additional panelists here. We have two panelists who will be joining us virtually. And Brent, I'll turn it over to you to introduce the panelists and talk a little bit about the setup here. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Betty. It's so good to be with you all. And I doubt that there's going to be any technological challenges. We're really excited for this session. Again, Brent Madden, Executive Director of the Next Education Workforce, where we get to think every day about how we design schools and the staffing of those schools to do way better by educators and by students. And this session, in some ways, is aligned to that big idea, leading for dynamic learning systems. And we've got an incredible panel, but before we actually introduce them, we want to learn as a panel a little bit about you and a little bit about how you're entering into this, this conversation. And so with that, if we could put up the first of a set of Slido engagements. And this is, as a former high school teacher, one of the most dangerous things I could possibly do, which is ask you to get out your cell phones. Oh, yeah, all right, thank you. That's probably true. So here we are. The first question that we've got for you as a panel is just describe yourself. We've got this incredible group here. And if you needed to put yourself in a bucket, what bucket would you place yourself in? Where do you sit within the educational ecosystem? So far, no big surprises. We'll give people another beat. The vast majority of us, college, university faculty members or leaders, another 10% or so, P12 educators or leaders. Ooh. Yeah, students could be others. Maybe we're all students or learners. You can only vote for one. This is the peril of forced choice. All right. So the vast majority of us are sitting in that top box. Let's go to the next question. This is a continuum. Again, anyone that hangs out with me knows that I love a forced choice. So where on this continuum would you place yourself in the work that you do? On the far right-hand side, we're thinking about very large scale, national, international leveled work, as opposed to something that's very place-based on the left-hand side. Take a second and register. So interesting. Shai, what are you seeing? Is this surprising to you? Knowing what you know about who's in the room? A lot of people, would you say, skewing left? Trimodal. Look at this audience, breaking out the big to trimodal distribution. Yeah. All right, let's see our next question. All right, again, Mr. Forced Choice, if you could make one large bet on improving public education, where would you place that bet? Don't worry, you'll have a chance to really discuss what the heck, well, what do each of these things really mean? And the 10% of you that have voted other, you'll get a bit some voice to what that actually is. Curriculum, 2%. Oh my goodness, this is getting spicy, people. All right. And let's move to our next school redesign, 26%. Okay. And this came up a little bit in the previous conversation. I think Kwame even in some ways teed this question up for us. Should we be preparing our teachers for the schools we want or the very practical nature of the schools we have? Oh, why schools? Thank you. This came out of some of the pre-conversations that we were having with the panelists. And I love this notion of like, well, why do we even need to be talking about a traditional notion of school? Like, what does that mean? Maybe the word school should be replaced with learning spaces or learning communities or a learning ecosystem. And finally, and we heard about this a little bit even in Professor Maynard's opening, this notion of you get what you measure. And so I'm curious, you'll have the opportunity, open response finally. What are 1, 2, 3 educational outcomes that you believe are important for us to pay attention to measure? I think that you can probably vote more than once. Humility, basic foundational skills, employability, durable skills, critical thinking. This is very interesting given the way that we started today's conversations. Problem solving, creativity, reading, kindness, social and emotional regulation. We can also make all of these available to you after the session too, because the power of the people in this room are really incredible. Some of those people are up on the stage, and some of them are joining us remotely from thousands of miles away. Thank you for all of that. If this, whoa, that was really cool. Was that a special effect, Tech Squad? It's my distinct pleasure for us to have such an incredible group of laureates to think with us about the sorts of topics that you just weighed in on. And the 3 incredible panelists that we have, starting on the screen in the top right, we've got Vicky Colbert, the 2017 Yidan Prize for Education Development Laureate, and she is the founder and director of Fundación Escuela, Nueva. And she will be describing for us a little bit more about what that work is. We'll see this across all of our panelists today, that this group does not shy away from scale and impact. And I cannot wait for you to get to know each of our panelists a little better. Joining me on stage is Shai, Reshef, the 2023 Yidan Prize for Education Development Laureate, and the founder of one of the coolest organizations that I think I've ever heard of, the University of the People. And we're very, very happy. I just saw an interview with you and Michael Moe in anticipation for the GSV, ASU GSV conference. We're in for a treat, people. And then finally, on the screen on the bottom, we've got Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond, 2022 Yidan Prize for Education Research, a laureate and a professor of education emeritus, emerita at Stanford University, as well as a founder of a whole bunch of different organizations, including the Learning Policy Institute, which was founded in 2015. I am so happy to be joined by this incredible set of leaders at all sorts of level and scale. If you could just join me with a round of applause and welcoming all of us, and we're about ready to kick this off. I thought it would be really helpful to have, in their own words, each of our laureates essentially answer this question. What are the key challenges, problems in education today, and how is your work helping to address them? And so we're going to give them each, and I swear we're keeping track of the time here. Thank you, Vicky, for leading us off and modeling what the 5 minutes looks like. 5 quick minutes of what are the key challenges and how is your work helping to address them? We'll start with Vicky, then we'll go to Shai, and then we'll go and finish with Linda. And then the question you're all going to get to each other is, what did someone say that perked your ears up and makes you want to respond? Or how is it pushing and changing your thinking? So get ready to respond to that question after we've each had 5 quick minutes to talk a little bit about our work and what's going on. So, Vicky, I trust that everything's going to work here, and you're going to share your screen, and you've got 5 minutes. Take it away.
Thank you so much. Well, regards from Colombia. I'm from Fundación Escuela Nueva, a small Colombian NGO. It's very important that I highlight that. It has a different connotation. Ironically, Escuela Nueva in Spanish means new school, and it's one of the longest bottom-up innovations of the developing world that's been sustained. I've been sustaining this project from all my professional spheres, and it has inspired many educational reforms worldwide, very remote areas such as Vietnam. So it's really for us, the challenge was changing the learning paradigm. Nothing new. We have nothing new in the philosophy of education. What Montessori said many years ago, what Piaget, what Vygotsky, what John Dewey, they were all inspirations. And so it's nothing new in the philosophy. But for us, it was so important to put it in practice because many of these ideas came to the elite schools. And Colombia, like the rest of Latin America, had a history of armed conflict in the mid-70s. And this had a tremendous negative impact on children. And children in Colombia, like in the rest of Latin America, didn't have access to complete primary education at that time. Our challenge was how to universalize primary education. So we started with those invisible schools. We call them the Cenicientas, Cinderellas, it's in English, invisible to most educational planners. And so we started working with them. So I started working with the teachers, where there were so many challenges, so many challenges that we had, that basically we were forced to think systemically from the beginning, to really look at the root causes. And instead of the symptoms, we wanted to look at the root causes. And so children demanded a more peaceful type of interaction, and necessity for us was the mother of innovation. So our strategy was, let's take the school as the unit of change, bottom up at that moment, and we wanted to transform all this complexity into very simple, manageable action. So we focused on teacher empowerment, teacher to teacher, and we did we were inspired by David Corton in the sense of that first we had learned to be effective and demonstrate effectiveness, then we had to learn to be efficient, and then we were ready to universalize it. So Escuela Nueva started as a local innovation, and gradually it became a national policy in Colombia. I'll show you some pictures. So what is Escuela Nueva? As I said, nothing new in the philosophy of education, but at least one of the important things is we have had a lot of evidence. So quality education for equity, because we wanted to reduce inequity in Colombia, like in the rest of the region. Citizenship, John Dewey inspired us so much with democracy and 21st century skills. Sigamos. Okay, so what does the Escuela Nueva promote? As I said, nothing new. Child-centered, active, participatory, and cooperative learning, different learning paces. So we incorporate the concept of flexibility. So it's self-paced learning. We modularize the curriculum. A new role of the teacher as a mentor, as a guide, a facilitator, not a transmitter of information. A close relationship between parents and family and community. And we had to change to sort of overcome what was happening in our faculties of education. We wanted teachers to be trained with the same methodologies that they were going to be using with their children. So effective experiential teacher training methodologies, and not let them alone. We had a lot of teacher-to-teacher support. A lot of nurturing democratic and participatory values and active citizenship. Colombia was the first democracy in Latin America. So for us, this was important. And of course, we wanted a new culture of peace, especially because of the armed conflict we've had for so long, and citizenship, allowing boys and girls to learn, participate, empowering them and their communities. We've had a lot of research behind, a lot of evaluations from UNESCO, from University of London, Stanford, World Bank, whatever, Colciencias, the National Department of Colombia. This was the first study in Latin America done by UNESCO, YESE. And, at that time, 20 years ago, Colombia was the second country after we reached 20,000 schools after Cuba, where rural schools outperformed urban schools. And this is important. We managed to do it. And for example, this was a study done by support of USAID. We started with the support of USAID. This was a study that USAID promoted in Guatemala on democratic behavior of children, especially in indigenous groups. And, a lot of recognitions. The World Bank selected as one of the 3 outstanding reforms in developing countries that impacted national policies. One of our 3 main achievements, the United Nations Development Report. The USAID spent a lot of research, especially in indigenous groups in Guatemala. And of course, the issue of quality. National Planning Department in Colombia, it demonstrated that Escuela Nueva compensates for socioeconomic limitations when comparing children of the lowest level of the poor or the poor with the other level of socioeconomic level. So last year, we've always have had evidence-based. So last year, we won the 2024 Jacobs Founding Best Prize precisely for evidence-based decision-making. So we've always had evidence behind what we've been doing, and that has helped us to be such a, one of the longest bottom-up innovations that's still being sustained. Thank you. I hope I was 5 minutes.
Oh my gosh, Vicky, you totally nailed it. That was so good. Yes, we should definitely clap. The only thing I did not hear, this is in 1 or 2 schools. No, how many schools is this?
This has impact. We have mainly in Colombia, we reached more than 24,000 schools, but then in the rest of the world, in other countries, we've impacted through governments, like let's say more than 7 million children. But working through governments. This is another issue because we also learned, and I want to highlight the importance of a World Conference of Education that took place so many years ago. Everybody forgot about it. The World Declaration on Education, that, it was so important because the conclusion was education is so important. Not only it's the responsibility of governments, it's of civil society and of public-private partnerships. So we learned that you have to work with governments for reaching impact and coverage. But for 2 key words, quality and sustainability, you need public-private partnerships and the role of civil society. So I've been in the government. I was Vice Minister of Education many years ago. Now I'm heading a small NGO precisely to continue innovating. We've adapted it to urban areas, to displaced and migrant children. We have 2 million Venezuelans in Colombia. So we've adapted. So our small NGO has been adapting to many things, but I wanted to highlight the importance of these world declarations that everybody forgets about.
Thank you. We're talking about massive impact at massive scale. Speaking of, Shai.
So I founded the University of the People in I founded the University of the People in 2009 to address the challenge of having hundreds of million students, according to UNESCO, that cannot afford higher education. Now, students cannot afford all over the world higher education, either because it's too expensive. The situation here, if you haven't heard, education is expensive here. or because they live in countries where there aren't enough universities. Africa is the best example. Nigeria, the largest country in Africa, 10.5 million high school graduates every year. 1.5 million out of them pass the university entrance exams, meaning qualified for higher education, but there are seats for 500,000. So, by definition, 1 million lost generation. There are other places where students are deprived for political reasons. Refugees are the best example. Cultural, religious, political reasons, I don't know how to define it, but women. I guess that Afghanistan, if I said women in Afghanistan, will say it all. And there are other reasons, personal reasons, and any other reason. And for all these people, we believe that higher education can be the solution. You can bring the university to them wherever they are at a minimal cost and resolve this challenge. So we started in 2009, but from the very beginning, we wanted a few things. First, to build a model, to show the world that higher education can be accessible, affordable, with the right quality. Second, that you want to open the gates to everyone who is qualified to try and get a degree, to make it accessible and affordable, meaning very minimal price, but also to make sure that you both make them ready for the job market. These kind of students come to you in order to have better future, not to broaden their mind. But we wanted them to have critical thinking and, knowledge of the world and everything, and creativity, everything that we believe that every university students will have, and make them well-rounded individual while preparing them for the job market. So we started in 2009. We put the students in small classes of 20 to 30 every time they take a class, 20 to 30 students from 20 to 30 different countries. When they study, they have a professor for every 23 students in the class, and every student has a program advisor that is with them from the day they sign up until they graduate. So this is our model. By now we have 153,000 students coming from 209 countries and territories. Believe it or not, there still are at least 2 countries that I know that we don't have students from. And we are teaching only the degrees that are relevant for them to find a job: business administration, computer science, and health science, associate and bachelor degree, as well as MBA, Master in Education, and Master in IT. That's it, degrees that are very relevant for the job market. We have, out of our students, 60,000 are from Africa, 40,000 coming from Arab countries. Out of them, 30,000 study in Arabic. Following the war in Syria, we decided to have Arabic in addition to English. So we have 30,000 students studying in Arabic. We have 4,300 women studying in Afghanistan, hiding and studying with us. And what we are extremely proud of, thank you. What we are extremely proud of is that we start having graduates in Afghanistan. And out of the women who graduate, 60% working remotely as programmers with international companies, which is like, okay, that's why we started the university for them. And we are, actually, I assume that the amount of money that they make as programmers with international companies is probably more than any other Afghan person, but that's beside the story. So that's what we do. And yeah, it's 5 minutes, so I have to stop. I can talk another 50.
Yeah, we'll get to more. And at this point, how about we switch over to Linda?
I think I'm on. Can you hear me?
Yes, beautifully.
I feel so privileged to be sharing this conversation with both Vicky and Shai, whose work I so admire, and yours, Brent, as well. So really delighted to bring in the kind of issues that I've been working on, which are very related to these. One is, and my work has been both starting schools. I've started several schools and helped other people start schools. and redesign teacher education programs, because I look at schooling and preparation of educators together, as Vicky also discussed in her presentation. I do research. So I've done research on what I think are productive school models, and then I'm engaged in policy. Right now, I'm the president of the California State Board of Education, and I've been involved in, working with governors and presidents and others on how you carry these things into policy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I think the big challenges are, and this will be resonant, I think, with what we've heard from others, and I'll say this very, very quickly. If I can get my screen to share and come up to the top of this presentation. I think part of what Vicky already described is how we really need to change the paradigm of schooling. And a lot of that paradigm, both in the United States and abroad, is because in the early 1900s, a century ago, we sort of adopted the factory model, the idea that we were putting kids on an efficient assembly line, standardizing the procedures so that they would move along, from one teacher to another for each grade level and for each subject area. Teachers were viewed as individual assembly line workers, sort of stamping students with a lesson as they came through, with a prescribed curriculum, a tracking system that is differentiated in the United States. It was very explicitly differentiated by race and class, because eugenicists were actually part of the design of the, quote, modern school that was being created there. And then the schools were explicitly designed to select and sort students for, their roles in life rather than to develop talent. And so we still have a lot of these features in our system today. They're deeply problematic. Schools were not designed to support relationships, to support the individual needs of different students. They focus in the US on fairly narrow tests that don't allow us to get to powerful and engaging learning as easily as we need to. Lots of an emphasis on extrinsic rewards and sanctions, and we have a lot of inequality baked into the system. We know a lot about what successfully redesigned schools do. As I said, had experience working with brilliant people to start schools like that. They are very much like what Vicky has been working on in Columbia, where you have small learning communities, where you have personalized approaches, where you're engaged in experiential learning and project-based learning, where the pedagogy connects to students' cultural contexts, as well as being supportive of democracy, restorative practices, family engagement, and collegial communities. So all of these things, as Vicky said, Vygotsky, Dewey, Montessori, had a sense of what the knowledge production process for people really is, and they designed schools that build on the way people actually learn. We recently at the Learning Policy Institute began a program on really redesigning schools and systems, beginning with a lot of emphasis on the high school, where these features are often the most ingrained. And when we put it all together, we have lots of examples of schools that are teaching the way students learn best, teaching for powerful learning. You see extraordinary outcomes in schools like these in many, many cities and rural areas around the country, and indeed around the world. But the question then is, how do we scale? How do we get that to scale up? And one thing is to really understand that we've got to prepare teachers and school leaders, as well as educate policymakers about the science of learning and development and what we know about how children and adults actually learn, to the point that Shai is making about the access of the University of the People to the desires for learning that people have and the ways in which we learn. We know, in contrast to the way that we designed the original factory model school, that it's not as though your brain is baked and done at birth, and then it's just a question of putting you in the right assembly line. The brain is always developing. What we do in education is design the relationships and the experiences that actually matter for brain development, which happens throughout your entire life. Even at my age, my brain is still wiring and rewiring. We know that learning is social, emotional, and academic, that how you feel and how you interact with others has everything to do with what you learn. that we can design for all of those features of development. We know that learning is stimulated by curiosity and inquiry and by connections, both to people and ideas. And that's actually what allows the neural wiring in our brain. And that if you ask questions that are meaningful and give small and large opportunities for inquiry, students learn much more effectively. They also need to them, of course, to have learning that transfers and is usable later. They need to apply it in meaningful contexts. They need to connect what they know to what they're learning. And we all learn within our cultural contexts. And as teachers understand those contexts and those connections, part of teaching is understanding the learners and what they bring, as much as understanding the content and the curriculum that you're trying to help them master. And we finally know that a child's best performance occurs under conditions of low threat and high support in settings where they're accepted, respected, and enabled. Variability, as Vicky also noted, is the norm and not the exception. So with these understandings, we're redesigning teacher education and leader preparation so that people bring this understanding into the school. We've also got to redesign policy, which is still based in many, many places on this old factory model design, the standardization that it implies, as well as the sorting and selecting rather than developing talent that it encourages. And that I think we have underway both in the work that is going on in California, but also in the states that we work with at the Learning Policy Institute all across the country. And I will stop there.
It almost makes me think that one of the requirements of being a laureate is being able to nail the timing. This is such a true pleasure to work with such consummate professionals.
That's the only compliment you can give us. Thank you.
I want to start with you, Shai. What did you hear from the others that made you perk up?
No, I think that the one thing that I heard, and it's something that we deal from day one, is how do you scale? How do you make your project, your program, your work solve the world challenge? I said it from day one, try to build a model that will be relevant for millions of students. Well, we still don't have millions, will we? I don't know. But the same there. And I guess that because there are so many people in the world that still don't have education at any level, how do we find a solution that will address large part of the world? Yes, you cannot resolve anyone's problem, and you cannot accommodate everyone, but accommodate the majority. And that's what we're dealing with, and I see that we are not the only one, and I think that that's the main challenge for all of us.
I love that, and we'll touch on scale again in a minute. Vicky, how about you? What did you hear?
I mean, it's just so important to listen to Linda, to see that she has worked so much in policy and in research. And, everything I say, it's just wonderful to see how it relates to what she's saying in policy. And also Shai is, just the whole concept of democratized education. It's the most important thing in the world. And, but both the mind and the heart, both. We've been measuring self-esteem since the beginning. And as soon when we see these things in children, they flourish. So, it's just so wonderful to listen to my colleagues and see how we can link together. And now with Shai, for us, it's a big challenge because precisely we started bottom up and working with the teachers themselves and them being the agents of change. Because I was in a way sort of getting away from the faculties of education in Latin America. I'm a little bit critical about it because we really need more of the thinking of Linda and of Carol Dweck and all these types of wonderful researchers into our faculties of education. Still in Latin America, we're very epistemological, very theoretical. We need more hands-on. So this is why it's also so challenging to listen to all of you. So this is why I think it's so important, and also to learn from Shai how we can start working with faculties of education and getting more of all this important knowledge to Latin American faculties of education, because we've done in-service training mainly. We have been doing on the job in service, but every time, since we work in the most remote areas of Colombia, there are teacher transfers. The children train the teachers, the other way around. So here's where we need more support for teacher training institutions and education institutions.
That feels like something we may pick up on in a second. Before we go there, Linda, what did you hear?
Well, I just love the way that I think everybody on this program is talking about shifting the purposes of education as well as the methods of education. I mentioned in my talk that the factory model was designed to select and sort. The expectation was that you would fall off the assembly line at the point where you couldn't make it any longer. And, Shai is really working on, as is Vicky, shifting from select and sort to develop talent. And the whole purpose of education has to be opportunity for all, developing the talents that we all need. We're at an inflection point in not only in our societies, but in our world. Will we have a sustainable world for humankind? If we don't begin to both educate, all of our people and then point them towards the social responsibility of getting along and solving the huge problems that we have, we may not have, a habitable world in the coming decades. So I just, the opportunity for all, I think also then, as Vicky talked about it, really personalizing for individual students, making sure that they can progress in the way that they are supported and most able to progress. The last thing I would note is that Vicky said early on, we were forced to think systematically and to look at root causes. And then we began this process, in a bottom-up way. And I would just simply add to that the words of a commissioner of education in New York that I worked with closely, Tom Sobel, who said what we really need to be doing is bottom-up support, top-down support for bottom-up reform, where we have these innovations. We've got to then think about what's the governmental role, what's the policy role, what's the system role that we undertake to build upon that work rather than marginalizing that work on the edges of the system.
Let's pick up right there, actually. Linda, love to hear just a little bit more about this idea of helping to design educational systems. And what does that word mean to you, educational systems? And specifically, how do we ensure that they benefit both the young learners and the educators, which we all know are so incredibly important to ensure that we're creating equitable opportunities for all young people. So let's focus on this idea of systems.
Yeah. So I think about sort of a triangle of influences on what happens in education. One is whether you're focusing on meaningful learning. And in that sense, the system is focusing on what's the curriculum, what's the assessment system, how are we defining learning, and then how are we engaging with it? And I think we have a lot of change needed in how we're conceptualizing curriculum in this era, and assessment especially, because we're hamstrung quite often by assessments that are very narrow, very much out of date, not really engaging around the most important things. But so the system has to deal with curriculum and assessment. In the United States, that's the state level. In many countries, it's the national level if they are smaller countries. Then the other part of the triangle is you've got to build professional capacity to then teach that meaningful curriculum. And so that means you've got to think about the systems for educator preparation. Not only what do they do, and how are they helping people learn? What are they helping them learn, and how are they helping them learn? Hopefully around the science of learning and development, using experiential means of learning for them as well. But also you have to make that accessible for every educator, not remote because it is too expensive or, it's not made available. This gets us again to the kind of work that Shai has been doing. But then there's professional capacity building, and then it's also what you do on the job to allow teachers to collaborate and learn from one another and so on. And then the third part is resource accountability. What resources do you provide, and how do you provide them to be sure that people have what they need in relation to the needs of the students they're serving, to enact that meaningful curriculum, and then to provide the professional capacity. And so we work on how do you change school financing systems? How do you support and change curriculum and assessment systems? How do you support and change professional learning systems and connect all of them together in a coherent way?
Sounds pretty easy. Shai, when I say the word systems to you, what does that conjure? Like, as you're thinking about educational systems?
Well, it's a good question because we try to avoid it. We are, as I said, we operate in 209 countries. We don't work with any governments whatsoever. Now, is it good? I'm not sure. But I know that that's the only way for us to push ahead, because every time you start talking to the government, to any government, the first thing that happens is that you're, wait, let's talk for 5 years before we start
Yes.
moving ahead. So we are just going and kind of like push the word out, usually through social media, and get the students and start talking to them. We don't have, we are accredited in the US. We just got 2 weeks ago regional accreditation by WASC, which is great because it means that we are the highest accreditation that we can get, which is actually good for our the endorsement of the university and the recognition about our quality. But then wherever we go, we said we are accredited in the US, and American accreditation is welcome everywhere. Not everywhere, but almost everywhere. We are, here and there, we are trying to talk to governments, but every time we talk to governments, it doesn't work. Now, partially because we don't have the resources and the energy and the time and the expertise to know what needs to be done. And I can tell you stories from the last 16 years, how every government that we start talking to, we failed, especially in Africa. So we're actually trying to bypass the systems and be recognized worldwide. All of our students find jobs. If there are countries that do not recognize our degree, which is not the case right now because we are regional, but when we were national accredited, there were countries where our degree was not recognized, including Canada and Germany, right? We're not talking about other countries. Now they are, but even there, our students can find job in the private market. So they couldn't, in some countries, they couldn't continue their graduate school. Other countries, some employers would not take them. They cannot work for the government, but overall, it was not a challenge, and we feel that if we didn't have the regional accreditation that we just got, we would still continue this way. Now, along the way, if we can work with governments, it would be great. But for me, working with governments is not as much as for us as for them. To show governments, in Africa, I mentioned Nigeria earlier, to show them that there is a way to accommodate all the qualified students. They can do it themselves. We can do it for them. They can do it themselves. They can look at what we do and replicate it or do whatever they want, but it can be done. So for me, it's not necessarily that I need to change their system. It's not necessarily that I need to be part of their system. It's okay if they do it by themselves, as long as the students will be served. So, yeah.
And Vicky, you have a very interesting perspective, having worked in some ways within the system itself, and now operating this very successful NGO. Where do you come down on this idea of educational systems?
You have to work with governments because that's the responsibility, health and education. But it's tough. It's really very, very difficult. You have to be so persistent. I can imagine every time, they would say, here comes this lady again. every time there's a change of government and a new minister, but you have to work with them. But fortunately, in Latin America, decentralization has been very strong, and that has taken a lot of energy of the education systems. And pedagogy was forgotten because everybody was learning how to decentralize. But you also have to start bottom up and working with local governments, but you have to have a lot of patience. But one of the things that has helped us so much over the years is we've always had some type of evidence. And that has helped us so much. Empirical evidence So that has helped us, sort of overcome these changes permanent in government and big bureaucracies. I actually, when I started, I had to hide from the bureaucracy. So I was forced to be bottom up, but I needed to show evidence on the ground. And then I started bringing the people in to convince them gradually. But evidence has helped us so much. And this is why we've it's been one of the longest innovations that has been sustained for so many years. We've been holding the baby from different professional spheres. But fortunately, from a small NGO now, we can continue innovating. So we're beyond the rural multi-grade schools. We've also adapted it to urban schools for displaced children with a lot of Venezuelan migrants. So we continue innovating, but you need the three. You need governments, you need civil society, and public-private partnerships. If I hadn't knocked on the door of the Coffee Growers Federation, it would have been very difficult. They helped us so much. And some of the best examples were in the coffee region. So you just have to learn to work in teams. And this is one of the things I wanted to highlight from the 21st century skills. I think, and I wanted to highlight this also because I mentioned I did part of my studies at Stanford, Linda. One of my teachers was Elizabeth Cohen. Everybody talks about personalized learning, but nobody talks about cooperative learning.
Right.
And for us, it was so crucial to teach children how to learn to dialogue and listen to each other. Learning to work in teams is one of the 21st century skills that is the toughest one to reach. And we have to learn in relation to that. So I feel it's so important. And this is why I first had to knock on the doors of the University of London, and they published the first study we had on the impact on peaceful social interaction of children in Colombia. And coming out of Colombia was so important. But I had to publish first there at the University of London, so here they would believe me in Colombia. Okay, so our faculties of education would believe us. So you just have to learn to be, how to beat the system, although you have to work with the system, but you have to learn how to beat the system. I guess that's my previous sociological background I had.
I'd like to just add one theme that I'm hearing here, which is that in every case, when Vicky just said, I had to sort of avoid the government for a while and get the work done, right? Sometimes you have to do this work sort of subversively to begin with. I relate to that in some of the work that I've done. You don't ask permission. If you're in a, for K-12, you're in a governmental system. Higher ed is a little bit different, but sometimes you have to not ask permission, but beg forgiveness if it comes up, and then do your deal with the system when you're ready to demonstrate what you can do, but then bring them around. And I would say that what Shai's done is essentially saying we're just going to do this, and quite often the best innovations start that way. But at the point where you really want it to scale more widely, engaging with policy is helpful, and that's, I think, the accreditation story that Shai told, the working with government story that Vicky told, and the working on policy story that I'm telling. That the way you start and the way you ultimately get to the largest scale may be, in different. You have to be willing to engage in different ways at different junctures in scaling.
And that what matters might also vary depending on each of those stations. And I'm curious, Vicky, you said 2 or 3 times the evidence, and I'm curious what was the evidence that counted, and for all of us, what are the things that we're not measuring well enough yet? Let's start with you, Vicky.
We always demonstrated better results in foundational literacy, in language and math, which is what everybody measures. But we started incorporating, and I mentioned previously, the self-esteem for us was so important. And with the University of Chile, Católica de Chile, a friend of mine, Margarita Hausler, she lent us her scale of measurement self-esteem, and we adapted it to Colombia. So we can see this. And when we start seeing that children's self-esteem is improved, they start flourishing, they start learning. And this is because, there was a nice environment in the classroom, because many of these children really suffer a lot, and they have tremendous backgrounds and a lot of conflict in their homes. And I just don't want to mention all the problems that force us to think systemically from the beginning and to go to the roots of everything, even to bring girls' participation, because girls had to stay home taking care of their younger children. So it's changing a whole culture. But fortunately, we had measures and always showing at least language and math, what everybody shows, but also all these other social emotional type of measurements that are so important, especially the peaceful social interaction. I think that's so important. And working in teams, I wanted to highlight the 21st century skills. We were tackling them, learning to learn and learning to have critical thinking and learning to work in teams and to synthesize information and to communicate ideas. And so I think, these, just focusing on these issues are so important. And we had, since for us, and it was everything, but necessity was the mother of innovation for us. For example, we learned that teachers learn more from other teachers. So we created what we call the microcentros. And it was cheaper. We would get the teachers together among themselves, and they would learn much more from the other teachers than from the supervisors. That's why I guess supervisors in Latin America have sort of becoming obsolete because they're so expensive. And and so sort of the best type of supervisory type of work was from teacher to teacher. And this has maintained a community of practice. Now we have many challenges because Latin America does not have connectivity in the rural areas. We had to think of, concrete materials. You cannot use tablets because they're too expensive. It would be very expensive. We had to think of cost effectiveness. And I think we now have a Nueva, which is we have a community of practice because the teachers live in the towns and they have more access to connectivity. But rural children in Latin America do not have. So here's where we had to even think of having dialoguing textbooks that would remain a couple of years and children would not use them and write on them. So everything we had to do, we had to see that it was cost effective. And that that we could knock on the doors of the World Bank or knock on the doors of international organizations, showing that it was feasible to scale up.
Thank you. And that idea of cost effectiveness, I mean, Linda, I just want to say thank you to you and LPI and others for some of your work that's helped me personally with some of these outcomes, right? Like the idea of the cost of replacing a teacher, for example. And these are measures that I'm using. I'm curious, what do you wish we were measuring more of?
Are you asking Shai or me?
Sorry, Linda, you.
Okay. I would add to the list, of course, you want to be taking care of the basics, but learning ability. When Google did a big study a while back of what predicted success at Google, they looked at transcripts and grades and test scores and all this stuff, none of which predicted success at Google. Ultimately, they said what predicted success was learning ability. That is your ability to be confronted with a problem, figure out how to get resources to begin to answer that problem, work with others to design a solution or a response or whatever it is, test yourself, the viability of your solution, and continue to revise it yourself. The ability to learn collaboratively and individually. And I think that if that becomes the way we think about both measuring, but also obviously developing students' abilities, everything they do, then will be much more responsive. And then I would add to that social responsibility, the ability to work collaboratively to resolve conflicts, to problem solve, and to be socially responsible. That is to make your classroom, your school, your community, your country, your place in the world better, to use what you know in a socially supported and responsible way. And again, I think this is the survival of the species depends on us developing these kinds of skills.
And to do them not in ones and twosies, but at a massive scale. And all three of you have done some really remarkable work at very large scale. And so for the rest of us, we saw, I think it was a trimodal distribution at the beginning of the chat about where we're centering our work. But for those of us on the right-hand side, of that trimodal distribution that are thinking about scale. What's a piece of advice that you each would have for us as we're thinking about impact at scale? And let's start with you.
Well, I think that I touched it earlier. Don't let anything stop you. So if you feel that there are barriers, just go the other direction.
Exactly.
But it is true because, you know, we talked about governments. If you're waiting for the governments, I guess that we would still be working in 1 or 2 countries and waiting for the other governments to say yes. They don't let you work as long as you don't breach the law. You know, in the Arab world, all the Arab world, and we have 40,000 students studying from the Arab countries, online learning is not recognized. Not us. Online learning is not recognized altogether. So we have 40,000 students who say, okay, maybe it's not recognized by the government, but it is recognized by the workforce. And we want to find a job. We don't want to work for the government. Therefore, they come to us, and we continue to grow there. Actually, the challenge that we have in the Arab world, like in other places, is the cost, because we are tuition free. We are not free. We charge the students $140 per each end of course exam. So a full year for someone who studies full-time is $1,400. A full degree is $5,600, which is nothing compared to the US tuition, but it's still significant in some countries. I mentioned earlier that we have 4,300 Afghan women. I did not mention that we have over 20,000 Afghan women applicants, which we can't accommodate simply because we can't take so many students without scholarship. So the question is, how do you make yourself in a position that you can do, even though there are barriers, you can overcome them? Second, how do you make your product or service affordable? You know, I mentioned our price. We cut the price dramatically. We are ultra low cost. We are not totally free. We are tuition free, but we are not free. But how do you reduce the price dramatically? How do you make sure that the quality is there? And for all these things, by the way, and for the magnitude, I think that AI comes into the picture, and we talked about it earlier. I think that AI can help us, as well as other education suppliers, work in a large scale by reducing the cost. So there are ways to go wide and to achieve a significant impact at a smaller price possible, the lowest price possible, with the right quality. Yeah.
So both Linda and Vicky, you'll have a chance to weigh in and scale in the lightning round at the very end. But I want to turn the time to the tables. And if we could flash up a couple of questions for you to grapple with, and whatever else you would like to engage in. We are going to have a final way to collect information. And so if you could look at the people at your table and quickly put your finger in your nose or whatever system you have to not be the record. Just kidding. To have a recorder for each table to capture a single pithy idea that's emerged from all the wisdom that is here as you engage in the next few minutes of conversation. And so if we could go to one more slide, make sure you've got a reporter at the end, and we'll give you a minute to just capture that. We've got a couple of questions for you. And, the first is around this idea of designing and leading systems that benefit both learners and educators. What changes really need to happen, and what should we not make sure that we throw away? There are things that are happening that are good. What are we currently measuring in education or not measuring that we should be? And guess what? There were tons of other ideas that came up. Perhaps one of those is what's motivating you and your table. Take a good 10 minutes right now to just talk and chat with each other, whether it's about one of the questions on the screen. Again, we're going to ask for a pithy statement at the end that you can put up on the Slido. The time is yours. A couple typing. To log a big idea in here, our panelists will all have a chance to review them as they come in and use them to inform a final idea or statement. So thank you for bringing your voice into this conversation through what's up on the screen. Thank you again for the people that are putting their thoughts onto the screen. We'll take another minute here, and then we'll close up. Another 60 seconds or so. Understanding the realities that teachers are facing. Students should be trained to measure the effectiveness of AI systems. The option to take control of their education. Keep them coming in. Thank you. Curriculum should be preserved to be able to specify the goals and outcomes. Consider how you can achieve your function without worrying about sticking with the traditional form. Scale learning for the future. Preserving the human connection and learning environments. What matters and how do we create the conditions for humans to flourish? I love that word flourish. We've heard that a number of times. Innovation is not always in the novelty, but in the mindset shift and application. We'll keep these coming in. And as we do, I would like each of our panelists to leave us with 1 minute of whether it's a reaction to something that's come in on the screen or just a parting thought. 60 sweet seconds each. Shai, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think that my take is, how do we make all of us think big, and how we all can and should change the current systems, challenging them, and make better work as much as we can. And that's the answer for us and for our world.
Very nice. Here they are. Vicky?
For me, it's so important, the whole concept of social participation as a cross-cutting dimension of all the components. And even the World Bank has manual on this, the process by which people share control of their decisions on activities, projects, programs. And the evidence of studies on participation have demonstrated that it enhances quality, sustainability, and impact. So we tried to put this in practice in Escuela Nueva. And, in the learning guides, and how do we have social participation embedded through the whole intervention? And one suggestion that I do have, and I know that Charles Yidan would like this very much, is that we work more together, the research and the development of the Yidan people, because I see there can be so much connection with Linda and with Shai, of course, with whom we've already have been talking about it. So I think it would be just wonderful if we connect this dimension of both research and development together.
I love that. And Linda?
Well, I'm just going to build on the other comments. I think that there's a lot of innovation happening right now, and systems, the limitations of our current systems are becoming more and more obvious, and there's a lot going on all over the world. So it's very important that we figure out how to share, the knowledge of these innovations, bring research and policy and practice together in that, to collaborate. There's been a text thread around collaboration throughout this whole conversation, and at every level, at the level of the school, at the level of the district and the system, and so on. If you want to, as they say, if you want to go far, go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I think we are going to have to build those connections and networks. to capitalize and be synergistic about the work that's going on. And finally, I do want to suggest that we keep thinking about what is it that does need to change in the systems that constrain a lot of what's going on, and educate the folks who run those systems about the ways in which these innovations can become the norm and not the exception at the margins.
Oh my gosh, what a brilliant note to end on. Thank you. Before we thank the panelists, I want to say thank you to the tech crew over here. This was no small feat. Thank you. And for all of our participants online, thank you for engaging. It does sound like there was something robust happening in the chat that we didn't even get to see. And if everyone would join me here to say thank you to our laureates and the wisdom that they bring, thank you very, very much.
And thank you.
Indeed.
Thank you. Yeah, this.
And thank you, Brent, for being a marvelous facilitator and being up to the challenge of dealing with remote as well as in-person participants. So, okay, folks, that was a great session, very lively and engaging, and a lot of humor too, which I appreciate. You now have an hour for lunch. We have lunch available on both sides of the room. With an hour, I also encourage you to step outside and take advantage of our sunny and warm Arizona climate for a bit before we return at 1 o'clock for our third panel of the day. So thank you all and see you at 1.